Well, hello there and welcome to the show. It's Tuesday and it's my weekly sit down with Eric Peters. And Eric, I was asking you before we jumped on the air here, anything interesting happened in the last week that you heard about?
Where do we even begin? I suppose the thing that's on everybody's mind is, the Charlie Kirk thing, and there are many, many, many things to talk about there. Um, I am perplexed by and kind of unnerved by what we've been told by the government with regard to what actually happened on that day. And maybe you have more information than I do, but one of the things that bothers me, we've all seen the Bigfoot video, right? What we're talking about here is that grainy picture of the alleged shooter scrambling off of the roof of the building, apparently holding a backpack as he jumps down to the ground and then he takes off. Well, we're also told by the government that the shooter used a Mauser rifle to commit this act. And my understanding is that Mausers are not very easy to disassemble, that you need
No.
a gun, a particular vice to do that job. I've confirmed that with a friend of mine who's actually a retired Army sniper who was in Afghanistan, and he thinks it's fishy too. So we're supposed to believe that in that moment, he pulls the trigger, and as soon as he does that, it's boom, explosions. People are frantic, screaming. He needs to get out of there right now. We're supposed to believe that he had the time and somehow maybe a vice to disassemble this weapon and then put it into a backpack and then scramble down the building, which is weird enough, but then it gets weirder. The FBI presents us with the photograph of the supposed rifle, which is now assembled. Now, did the FBI assemble it before they put the picture together or gave us the picture? Or are we supposed to believe that the shooter in his frantic panic to get out of there stopped to reassemble the rifle after he took it out of his backpack and then left it on the ground? I don't know. Something doesn't add up about that. What do you think about that?
There are way more questions than answers. And as a general rule, I don't trust what government is telling me. I mean, look, on the one hand, I want to believe good. They got the individual who did this because it really was a heinous thing. And even people who didn't know Charlie, I can't tell you how many people have talked to me in the last week that have just said, I can't sleep at night. Why am I grieving? I don't even know this guy. Maybe watched a few videos, or maybe they even hadn't heard of him before, but it just really impacted them. And it's such an incredible shock on the whole zeitgeist of what's happening around us right now that I think it's good to be skeptical and ask
Well,
questions. I don't care if people say, well, it's conspiratorial. The questions need to be asked.
a couple of points. One, I agree with you wholeheartedly. If somebody had done the same thing that was done to Charlie Kirk to, say, Rachel Maddow, I would be completely appalled by that. I'm not a fan of hers. I don't agree with her. But the idea of summarily executing somebody that you disagree with is egregious, and there can't be any tolerance of that. Second thing that I thought is worth mentioning is this issue of mentally ill people. And I'm talking about the people who believe that they're the opposite sex, who literally believe that. It's not simply a matter of a guy who's got a fetish for women's clothing and he wants to walk around wearing a dress, but he's aware that he's a man and he's not trying to convince you that he's actually a woman, and not just convince you, but expect and demand that you go along with that too. We have we have gotten kind of numbed to mental illness in this country, and we have abided it. And I think this is one of the consequences of that. I saw a news item the other day about a couple of commercial airline pilots who got canned because they had made obnoxious comments about the Charlie Kirk thing. But the thing that struck me is that these people were trans. Now, I don't know how you feel about it, but if I were boarding an airplane and I saw a 200-pound guy in female clothing sitting in the left seat, I'd get out of the airplane. And maybe some people will say that that's harsh of me to say that. I don't want people who are mentally unbalanced in positions of authority and handling things that are dangerous to other people. So that's another aspect of this that I think is really worth talking about right now.
It's really disturbing too to see how many people, and I'm talking not necessarily the people who are gender confused or the purple haired nose ringed people out there yelling all the time at ICE agents. I'm concerned at all the professionals, lawyers, professors, teachers, nurses that celebrated this man's death. And I'm not suggesting that we need to build a shrine on the Washington Mall. I'm just saying a little human decency goes a long way, but it starts to make sense why people were so inhuman during COVID. When
It
you see
does.
the way that they reacted, it's about that lust for power and humanity. That's a way further down the road consideration, if at all.
Yeah, I wrote an article a couple of days about now it's out in the open that touches on what you just said, which is that we can see the violence, even the sadistic violence that underlies principally the left. I know there are things that the conservative side of the aisle does that entails force. I'm a libertarian, so I don't like force for whatever it's applied. But generally speaking, conservatives, Republicans, they're more utilitarian minded. What do I mean by that? They will, and Trump's a good example of this. He'll believe that X, whatever the policy is, tariffs, let's say, they work. He doesn't look at it in terms of the moral principle. Well, is it right to impose something on people contrary to their will? He just says, well, this works. It's a good idea. We're going to do it. The left seems to be increasingly defined by this bloodlust urge to enforce obedience. And if you don't obey, if you question, that's excuse slash justification to kill you. And we did see that during COVID. We literally almost came to the point where people like you and I would potentially have been rounded up and put into a camp and maybe even lined up in front of a ditch. I don't think it's going too far to say that. We got that close to doing that. And it's a really alarming thing, but it's also a healthy thing in that it's now on the table. And we see what these people are up to. I think a lot of people are motivated by just general goodwill, because we assume we're not looking to hurt anybody. And we assume other people are of the same mind. Unfortunately, there are people out there who are not of that same mind.
I did see some what I feel were very exemplary acts of humanity and goodness from people, in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's murder. And I would encourage people focus on those things more so than the people, going and kicking over memorials or shrines or whatever, trying to interrupt vigils and so forth to make it about themselves. But having said that, I feel like we're in a very dangerous place right now. Attorney General Pam Bondi apparently gave an interview yesterday and was talking about it is time to crack down on hate speech.
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh boy.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's
Oh,
a
yeah.
that's a very subjective term. I mean, hate is that great unspecified predicate that we all know it's bad, but when you throw it around like that, who defines what it is?
Sure. Absolutely. The government, ultimately, right? And these people, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and just say that they're short sighted. So, okay, in the moment right now, we are going to focus on these tranny people, and that sort of hate. Well, what happens when the other side returns to power and then has that tool in their kit and decides the people like you and I are filled with hate? And, for that reason, we should have our gun rights taken away, or we should be rounded up and put into detention centers. It's really alarming that they're even talking about this sort of thing. And even more than that, that again, the people on our side, generally speaking, are okay with it. Like somehow it's okay because Trump or Bondi is proposing this. If Biden had said those exact same words that Bondi said the other day, most people on the Trump side of the aisle would have been, outraged and would have been, all over the internet complaining about it, which they ought to, but they ought to do it across the board, not just when the left does it.
I told a friend yesterday, I said, I feel like we're probably approaching a situation similar to what the citizens of Weimar Germany were in the 1930s, where you have the Bolsheviks closing in on one side, the National Socialists on the other. And by the way, I'm not saying Trump and company are Nazis. I'm just saying they were given a binary choice, both of which were not good. And I see us being rapidly shepherded into a corner where that's really the dilemma we're going to be caught on the horns of.
Well, I agree.
It's either
And
Trump or it's the purple haired commies.
how about this? Tell me if you think this is going too far. I think they are trying, they, meaning some people on the right, Trump, are trying to turn Charlie Kirk into America's Horst Wessel. And for people who are unfamiliar with that reference, Horst Wessel was one of the street fighters during the Weimar era who was killed by the communists. And then the National Socialists, the Nazis, turned him into this archetypical hero. In fact, the Nazi national anthem is an ode to Horst Wessel. And it seems like we're traveling down that road with Charlie Kirk, who seems like a good man, but he's not a god, and he shouldn't be put up as something that has to be venerated and worshipped as a totem. And I feel like that's where things are headed.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? I wish things were really clear, black and white, cut and dried, but there are some blurry areas here, and in those blurry areas is where the danger lies. On the one hand, it's clear there are people who believe it's not enough to disagree. If you say words that I don't like, I have the right to kill you. And the people who are celebrating his death, whether they believe it or not, that's inadvertently what they are. They're endorsing that with their glee. On the other hand, this is the perfect time for snapback in a way that brings us to a level of authoritarianism that we have yet seen. I mean, this may rival Lincoln in terms of the impact it could have.
It may, and I'm a little uneasy about this pending public funeral in Arizona on Sunday. This is going to be a mass event. There are going to be a lot of people there. And I understand that security measures have been put in place, but boy, it is a target rich environment, isn't it? It's exactly the sort of setup that could be used for a truly horrendous, nefarious purpose. And I hope that it can pass peacefully and that nothing awful happens.
Yeah, and there's a lot of uncertainty because it's not just the societal misfits, that you have to worry about. There are foreign interests. I mean, the guy who was ready to take a second crack at Trump last year
Huh?
had deep ties to Ukraine and had traveled there many times and considered that to be his, cause of his life. And I just wonder if, I'm not trying to plant more conspiracy seeds, but good heavens, there are countries, Israel among them, Ukraine among
Sure.
them,
And
who
this brings
who
up, oh, I want to
go.
bring up something here that I'm almost reluctant to bring this up. And you may have had these thoughts as well. But just before Charlie Kirk was murdered, what was the big news story?
You'll have to remind me.
Epstein's book, and
Ah,
specifically that birthday card that Trump supposedly wrote more than 20 years ago. That's very creepy. That's a line drawing of a naked woman with all sorts of creepy, cryptic messages on it to Jeffrey Epstein. And there's no question that that book is authentic. Nobody's even denying that. The contention before Kirk was shot was, well, did Trump actually write that card? And the evidence seemed to be, yeah, he probably did. And whether it's a convenient coincidence or not, the fact is that Kirk's murder pushed that entirely off the news. And
true.
I sometimes don't believe in coincidences.
No, I think, unfortunately, the times we live in require us to ask those kinds of questions. What is this preventing me from seeing? And I mean, I write a couple of daily articles for a couple of national publications, and it is hard to find content that isn't somehow Charlie Kirk adjacent.
Sure.
And I mean no disrespect to him. I'm just saying this is the number one topic on just about everybody's minds, and we should be asking, what is it keeping us from seeing?
Yeah, including what's going on right now in the Middle East. The Israeli government has is decided to just completely bulldoze Gaza at this point, and they're in the process of doing that. They launched an attack on another sovereign nation, Qatar. Uh, and oh, look here, a squirrel, right? I mean, again, no disrespect to Charlie Kirk. What happened to him was appalling, and I'm sorry for him and his family and everything else. But still, there are other issues that should be talked about at this moment.
Well, and I don't know if there's anybody who still believes or trusts in the mainstream media besides my dear old gray-haired mama who is, homebound and, has to watch TV to see what's happening in the world. But good heavens, watching the press double down on, well, the violence is from both sides. And I don't know how anybody can watch TV these days without wanting to throw something at the television set.
I don't think they do. I think you're right. I think it's gotten so fractured that the only people who are watching, what they call the mainstream media, are the boomers, the old people, because that's what they grew up with. That's what they're used to, and they're kind of just, baffled by the internet and everything else. And granted, I'm not that far behind them, so I don't understand TikTok and what was this thing that the kid who supposedly pulled the trigger? What's it called? There's some bulletin board or something.
Oh,
The D, I can't remember the term.
Discord.
That's it. Had you ever heard of that before this thing happened?
I have heard of it. My kids would probably be very familiar with it, but I'm old enough. No, I'm not. I'm not fluent in Discord.
Yeah. So there's this whole additional other world out there, that the people in their 20s are immersed in that, you and I really don't know anything about. Now, that's one of the reasons I think that they got rid of Kirk. I think he managed to connect with that generation. The other people haven't been able to do it. Like Tucker Carlson, he's about our age, and he does a good job, but he doesn't really resonate with the college age people. Kirk was young enough and relevant enough to that age demographic that he could, and I think that's probably what made him dangerous.
And there's also this curious foot shoe is on the other foot thing with cancel culture now. Not everybody, but there are a lot of people on the right that now are actively looking for anybody who voiced some kind of support for Charlie Kirk's murder, however vile or however veiled it may have been, and they're trying to get him fired. And there's a part of me that's like, serves him right. That free speech works both ways, and it's not free of consequences. If your boss thinks, wow, this person really is an a-hole, and I don't want them, representing my company, that's one of the consequences you may have. But I don't like seeing the right get all ginned up on the idea of this is a crusade to go out and find anybody who disagrees with me and get them canceled. I think we were complaining about that happening to us not so long ago.
Sure, it's a circular firing squad, isn't it? And just right now, it happens to be the left that's getting most of the fire, but it doesn't mean that we won't in our turn. In fact, it just sort of it builds it up into an even greater crescendo, doesn't it? We now have the political power, and so now we can exert that power against our political enemies. And great. So when our political enemies get power, they're going to be that much more enraged and determined to exact their vengeance. And it doesn't end well when you start down that road.
No, it seems like we're caught in a spiral, and I don't know how and where it ends, but it it uh, it feels like it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Let's talk some practical things that you and I could be doing to uh, to live happy, productive lives in spite of all the stuff going on around us and all the drama trying to pull us into it.
Boy, well, again, this is something that is entirely dependent on your circumstances. One thing I'm doing right now is splitting some firewood. Getting ready for the cold season, and not just the cold season, but also the expensive season. I've got the option to use a propane stove to heat the place, but propane has gotten pretty pricey. So I go out there and get a good workout with my awl and my log splitter and cut free wood that I cut down on my property. And not only is it something that benefits me financially, but it benefits me psychologically to be out there tangibly doing something that improves my situation. So you can scale that up, depending on what your circumstances within your world. What are things that I can do to make my situation not just better, but more under my own control? I think that's empowering, and I think that that's important.
I was really proud of my son. He'll be 25 in December, and the day that Charlie Kirk was shot, my son came home from work and he's like, Dad, I don't know what to think about this, but his suggestions were, I'd like to see us, and he listed off a couple of things, all centered around, let's make sure that our self sufficiency is taken care of, and that we know exactly where we stand. I was like, good boy.
Yeah.
That's a good reaction. That's not paranoia. That's what can we do to make sure that we're able to take care of ourselves if something, were to grow into a bigger concern or some kind of general strike, or I don't know. There's a lot of crazy stuff happening right now.
We are right now under a concerted psychological attack. No matter how you want to look at it, every single day we're barraged with horrible news, just about. And it induces a state of paralysis and depression in people. You feel it, I feel it, and you have to forcibly extract yourself from it. Otherwise, you're rendered kind of helpless in the same way that an animal that's cornered and knows that it's doomed and has no opportunity to get away sometimes gives up. If you've ever experienced something like that, we can't give up, and we shouldn't, because we do still have a lot of things that are immediately under our control, and we should take that control.
And I would caution one other thing here too, and that is, when you feel your emotions, really surging, that's a good time to take a couple of deep breaths and be aware that that's when we're most easily manipulated. When emotions high, whether it's fear, whether it's anger, that's when people can steer us in directions we may not choose ourselves.
Yeah, and there's something else I'd like to add that I think is important, and it's a tough one to articulate. I think we should try our very best to extend the grace to people that we disagree with, that was never extended to us. You know, if only for the sake of our own consciences, so that we know that we're not like that. Now, that's as distinct from action. You know, if somebody takes an action that's nefarious or evil, by all means, they should be confronted and dealt with. But just because somebody has a point of view that's different than yours, okay, we can talk about that. Charlie Kirk tried to do that. And I think it's important that we continue to hold that high ground rather than just do the thing that we objected to, which is you're bad because you have a different point of view. And maybe you are, but let's talk about it. Not we're gonna round you up, or we're gonna cancel you, or we're gonna cripple you economically, or even kill you.
And I'll throw one more thing on the pile here. If you really need something to kind of lift your spirits or to snap you out of the idea that it's all crap and it's getting worse, go find somebody to serve in some way. I mean, it could be hold the door for somebody, or if you're arriving at a parking spot at the same time, be gracious, let them take the parking spot. These are little things. It doesn't mean you're a doormat. It's just little things like that will shift your perspective to where you'll start recognizing there are people doing good things all around you. If you can see yourself as a source of good in the world, it does remarkable things to lift your spirits and give you hope that it's not all bad, or at least where I'm standing, I'm having a positive influence.
Yeah, you can't have civilization without civility. And civility is what builds civilization from the little things up. Like you said, just holding a door for somebody, saying, excuse me, making an effort to not stand there in the supermarket aisle so other people can't get around you. Just these basic little things. If people used to do those as a matter of course, because it was sort of inculcated in people, kids were taught that to be respectful, to be courteous. And there's no reason that we can't relearn those skills.
Including not camping in the left lane.
There you go.
Sorry, but I had
Right.
to throw that one in
Oh
there.
yeah.
That's one of my pet peeves. Even my kids who drive are now, oh, the left lane campers.
Yep.
Well, I feel better for having had this conversation. I know there are still tons of questions that we have yet to have answered, but I do appreciate your perspective. And before we duck out here, anything happening on the automotive front that has
Yeah,
particularly
some
caught
good
your
news.
attention?
The announcement just came out that Stellantis, which owns Dodge, Ram, and Jeep, has decided they're not going to they're not going to produce the electric version of the Ram 1500 that they said they were going to bring out, for the obvious reason that they're going to lose a whole lot of money on that deal. So they're cutting bait, and that's a good thing. The more that cut bait on this, the sooner perhaps this EV thing can be pushed back altogether. And again, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be allowed to buy EVs, nor that the manufacturers shouldn't be able to produce them, but it should be a free market thing. If the manufacturers decide, hey, there's a market for these things, we're going to make them. And if people want to buy them with their own money, not your money and my money, then great. That's what we ought to have, a free market.
Here, here. Well, I'll take the little victories. They add
Amen.
up.
Too.
All right, Eric, great as always to visit with you. I'll have a link to your website in my show notes. Thanks again, and here's to a hopefully less eventful week
Let's
between now
hope
and the
so.
next time we talk.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you having me on.